Hello, and this is the second part of the video in the pouring the water into the glass. So we've already set up our glass, we've got a light in the background, and we've got a bottom plane that's reflecting some of the light. So a few things we're going to have a look at now. Firstly is we're going to set the world color while we're here. So if I click on the world bit right here and color, we're going to actually go completely black. So the only thing lighting it is going to be the backlight from this glow, and that should be enough for what we need. And what we'll do is go to solid. Now if we have a look around here, we've got our two planes and our glass, and we're going to have to add in the water somehow. Now the way water works in Blender is you need to set up something called a domain. Now a domain is all the places that water can go. It's not quite the same as real life where water can go anywhere. You can make the cube big enough, I suppose, but it would slow down the whole system. So what you want to do is set up a domain, which is the area that you want the water to be able to go. And to do that, first off, we make a cube. So you see mine's a bit big at the moment, so let's scale this down. There we go. Now, this cube needs to completely cover where the glass is and be a bit higher. You see I'm scaling it on the Z-axis, making it a bit taller. There we go. Let's have a look at this. If we go to wireframe, I can see that the cube is taller than the glass and it's completely surrounding it on all four sides. There we go. So that means that our water will be able to be in a nice area that will include everything. Brilliant. What I then have to do with it is I'm going to create a sphere. Now, the sphere, I'm going to do this in wireframe mode. UV sphere, make it nice and small again. This is going to be where our water comes from. So we need a source of our water. Imagine like where the tap comes out, the outflow from a tap. And that is what we'll be creating. Let's make that a bit smaller. There we go. So the size you make this is generally the size that the water will come out. And I'm just going on each side just to make sure that it's slightly to one side, but in line with the glass. So there we go. If it makes a bit of sense, it's to the left because I'm going to want the water pouring out sideways. But I don't want it to miss the glass, so I'm going to make sure it's in line that way. Good. So this is where the water comes out of, this is where the water can go, and we also need to set the glass and the plane at the bottom to be obstacles, to stop the water from going through it. Now we're going to start off with the cube. So I right click on the cube, and I go all the way to the end to this one. This is the physics menu. So all of the physics stuff, so you've got force field, collision, cloth, all these kind of things are simulations, so simulating cloth and fluid and smoke and that sort of thing. But obviously we're doing water, so we need fluid, and we need to choose domain. So this, as I say, is the area that the liquid can go in. And you see it's actually disappeared now, which is not a problem at all. We're going to start off with setting the resolution. We'll leave it at 65 and 45 to start with. The higher the resolution is, the smaller that the particles of water are. At this setting here, they'll probably go through the sides of our glass, which we don't want, but it's going to be a good start so we can preview to check everything works. But we're just going to leave these things mostly as they are for now, but it's just a couple of little changes that we need to make. But if we look at the fluid world, this one is going to stay pretty much as it is. There's nothing we need to change in this. Fluid boundary, it's got some other sections in here, and we're going to change this bit. This is going to make the water a bit smoother. So I'm going to change the surface to 2 and the subdivisions to 2. And that's just going to make the water look a bit more like water, a bit smoother. And the fluid particles bit, we want to create a few little particles. So instead of 0, it's going to be 0.1. So that's all the settings we need to set on our domain. If you ever need to click back on it, it's probably called cube because it's probably the only cube you've got in the scene. Okay, so if you need to get back to it, go to cube. The next one we need to do is the sphere. As I say, this is an inflow to the scene. Okay, so it's the water flowing into the scene. So again, go to the sphere, fluid, and inflow. And you've got some settings here that say where it starts, all the way it works. Now, my one, I want it to go along the x-axis. Okay, and it's actually, the way it's pointing should be positive. We'll check this in a minute, and if I make an error, I can obviously do it again. But it should be positive because it's going that way, and it's on the x-axis if we want it to go from left to right on the x-axis. So we just change the velocity that it starts at. And we don't want it to go particularly fast, so I'm going to go 0.3 meters per second to start with. As I say, if it's not right, we can just change that in the future. Finally, we need to make this cylinder an obstacle. So fluid and obstacle. Now, there's a few settings here that we can set up, but when you're doing this, I'd suggest starting on shell to start with. It kind of works a little bit better for keeping the water in the glass. As I say, it will look like it's out the side to start with because of the resolution that we're setting it at, but we can work on that once we know it's roughly going in as we want it to. And that is pretty much the basic first settings. But we don't want to bake this for 250 frames. I'm just going to go up to 20 frames. And what it'll do is it'll animate 20 frames of the water pouring in, and you probably don't even need that many. Yeah, and that's how it goes. We go back to the cube, and we click on bake. Now what I'm going to do is, while it's baking, I'll leave it a couple of seconds working, then I'm going to pause the video because it'll take quite a while to do this. And then when I've stopped it, I'll get the video going again. So, bake. And you'll see at the top, this bar will slowly start to move along. So, once it's got all the way up to 100%, you probably won't actually notice anything that's changed in the scene. But if you go back down here to the timeline, you can move along the timeline, you'll actually see particles of water going to the glass. Now, on mine, it's gone through the bottom of the glass, which isn't ideal. But if I just go back a bit, I can pick any scene that I want to be the one that's my final water. And that's the basics of how we actually get water to work. What I'm going to do is I'm going to set it up with... I'm going to set it up with a texture now, with a material. So when we actually look at it, it will look more like water. Now, the basics here are exactly the same as glass. So if we go in and principled, we still want to set it. You can set any color depending on what the liquid's going to look like. We'll leave it close to white, but if you were doing red wine, you'd pick a red color. If you were doing orange squash, you'd pick a yellowy orangey color. So any of those will work for what you're doing, but you probably want to test it a couple of times first just to make sure it really looks how you expect it to, because certain things do have certain colors, but light will change the way it looks. So we'll leave it white, and what we're going to do is go down to IOR again. And as I said before, crystal, the IOR of crystal is 2. It's flat 2. But the IOR of water is roughly 1.33. So I'm changing it to 1.33 and change the transmission all the way up to 1. So it's see-through, and it's got the correct IOR. And so there's lots of websites online to check all the settings for the different things that you need to do. And let's just have a quick look in the rendered view. And you can see, obviously it's not a complete stream there, but you've got blobs of water going down, filling up the glass, it's roughly getting in there, all sorts of things like that. There we go. So if we're happy with where the liquid is, what we can do is we're going to rebake. And you see I'm on the cube. Actually, the cube is the water. But we're going to rebake, but this time our settings are going to be higher. So our resolution here, which is the bit that makes it a bit more detailed, we're going to set up to 150. But I'm going to actually save it first. So save our work. just in case it crashes or anything like that, I'm going to save it at 150. It's going to be a lot more detailed, and you see the memory's actually gone up more than tenfold. Okay, so that's up to 150, and I'm going to pause it again because this one's going to take a lot longer. Okay, so let's get started. Okay, so I've stopped mine a little early just to give you an example of what happens. When you change the resolution, it actually just changes the way the water works in general. I've not bothered doing many, so I've actually only done the first. Okay. I did about 20%, 15-20%, and then cut it off. So it's first percent, second, third, fourth. Depends how you want to do it, really. But the quality actually doesn't look much better, and that's because in our viewport display, we're just seeing the preview, which is this 45, rather than the final render 150. We can change this here to final, and you see it actually gets a lot more detailed. If I scroll in, you'll see the amount of particles is really, sorry, the size of the triangles and squares really small. You've got lots more bubbles popping up, all sorts of things like that. So that's pretty much how we do it. If I go to rendered mode, it actually looks like water going into the glass. Mine's still not very full. You probably want to do yours for a little bit longer, but this is how it works. Now, to finish off this scene, we really need to set up the camera to make it how we want it. So I'm going to press 0 to go inside the camera. And so let's just get rid of this. If I go down here, and let's get rid of the background image. There we go. And I'm going to move the camera directly in front of the glass, making sure that I can't see this sphere up here. I don't want to see that. Probably what I want to do, there we go, is I can actually make this a bit bigger so it fills the camera view. Because you don't want to see the black in the background necessarily. Let's just get more central on the glass. So these are all little fiddling around bits just to get it looking how you want it to be. I scale something X so it's off the scene. Now let's have another look at rendered view. There we go. So everything inside this camera here will be shown. You can see the water going in. I've not quite got the bottom of the glass, so I'm going to move out a little bit further. There we go. If the back bit doesn't quite match, it's not a problem because the outside edges of this plane are black, so you can't really notice it. But there we go. So we've got the water coming into the shot there, hitting the side of the glass and filling up. There'll be some particles around. So finally, what we need to do is setting up our render settings. What I'm going to do is, if I go to my scene view, I'm going to make sure I set up my color management. We've done this once or twice before, but if we go down to render, change it from default to filmic. Okay, this just makes the light work in a more realistic film version. And we change it from none to base. And I'm also going to change this one to filmic log as well. So those three settings, filmic, base contrast, and filmic log, are under color management in the scene view. I'm not going to simplify this one. Some of the ones that you might want to simplify, it will help speed up, but this one we're not going to. What I'm also going to do is denoising. Now, you'll see sometimes speckles in places. This one will get rid of the speckling. Okay? And finally, we're going to go over to this camera here and set up our final render. I'm going to go down to sampling. Now, this number here it will actually strongly affect how long it will take, but it will make the light look a lot better. I'm going to put mine up to 200. And I would suggest you do 200. That's quite a useful one. If you want to do a quick test render to check everything looks right, leave it at 50%. When you're happy, move all the way up to 100% and then start to render. As I've probably shown before, there's a time remaining up here. Mine says it's going to take 48 minutes or so. This is why best to do it in a bit of free time. Your computers are probably a little bit quicker than my Surface is, so it shouldn't take quite this long. But why leaving it at 50% for a test is a good idea. Okay, so I'm going to pause this video now, and when it's finished, I'll show you the result. Okay, and this is my final render. Don't render yourself if you haven't already. This took 12 minutes, which is actually a lot better than what it suggested it was going to take. We've got, see, all sorts of water particles coming off as the water goes down. Because I haven't actually filled out very much, it's very bubbly at the bottom down here. If you've got a bit more water in, so say up to about here, it will look a bit more like water under the surface, but I was a bit lazy in doing that. One thing that could potentially work, I'm going to try that in a second and show you the results, is you can change in the scene settings, simplify. Okay, so save this for now. Do click an F3 and save your picture. I'm going to cancel that. But I'm going to have a quick look at simplifying it and setting AO bounces render to 2. And let's see if this comes up with a different or quicker result. And the answer in this occasion is no. What that does is it limits the amount of time that light bounces, but it doesn't work particularly well with water and glass, clearly. If you're doing some other scenes, possibly put that up to 2 and make it a bit darker but still work. This one is not working. The easiest thing to do is do what I did before, leave that one off, and all your settings should be fine. Make sure you render it, save and upload to Firefly, and that was how to make water pouring into a glass.